Welcome, everybody, to the best and worst performer predictions for Week 7. This is the CFF List Duo. I'm Jay Mill. I got my partner, Willie B, as usual. How you doing, Willie?
Doing all right.
All right. A lot of people talked about last week being the week that didn't have very many good matchups, but looks like none of that mattered. We had a week full of upsets. That was talked about quite a bit on all the post wrap-up shows, on all the national brands, ESPN and CBS Sports and all those. But kind of any overwhelming things that stood out to you last week during Week 6?
It's just kind of like what we've both been saying. And when we talk about the G5 and against Power Four and all that, same thing applies when the blue bloods and all that losing to teams that they should never lose to. Times are changing.
Right. Yeah, the most interesting thing, I guess, is now seeing that, obviously Alabama stayed in the top 10, and even after losing Alabama, Georgia rightfully stayed in the top 10. But just the fact this year that you don't have to panic if you're a team that just has one loss. And a lot of these teams, that are at the top may not have to panic even if they get to two losses. So it's going to be interesting to see, kind of if you end up with some teams at the end with 3 and 4 losses, even having a chance here if they lose to, teams that are all in the top 10 or something like that. Probably going to be some pretty big arguments, but definitely a different year where these teams at the top definitely, are still very alive. So the
Yeah.
upsets are still interesting, but not nearly as, you know, meaningful in terms of ruining somebody's season completely, I guess, is what I got out of it.
So I mean, yeah, and you're always still going to get the little bit of the SEC bias.
Right.
It does help that you did beat Georgia, and then maybe you had a little letdown, but I kind of feel like they probably should have fallen a little bit further against losing a team to like Vandy.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Well, so I guess it
but
was
it is
nice
what
to
it
see
is.
Michigan. Michigan didn't stick around though with their second loss. They got bounced from the
Right,
top 25. So,
and rightfully so.
really going to be interesting. I think more interesting now to see what happens when teams get that second loss versus
Hmm.
a top 25 taking that first L, because so many teams or so few teams still make it through with just one. I think 2 is going to be the magic number to see what happens with these teams and if they kind of make a quick exit like Michigan and so forth. But we're here to talk more about fantasy football. So let's look at how we did last week. I guess overall we just reversed roles. You had your biggest waiver watch performance and hit the 100 mark. I finally beat you and scored a decent amount of points here in the best and worst predictions with a 9-7 outcome. We both, as I went through the numbers and the lists and who we picked to have the best weeks and the worst weeks, we both seemed to do really well, as usual, just because we didn't get guys in the top 3. And we had a lot of guys scoring the 20s that, didn't score for us in the competition we have against each other, but still managed to do very well. And then, as usual, as we'll touch on, we had some guys that we picked to do the worst that finished in the top end that did pretty well. So I think more than anything, that's where we got to improve is we're doing pretty good picking our best. We're not giving some guys the benefit of the doubt, it seems, and they keep making us look bad when we pick them to do the worst.
Right, and then we had a couple of guys that we still had the fourth place, whether it was best or worst. So
Right.
still steering people in the right directions,
Yeah. Yeah.
even though we don't get the points for it.
Exactly. So with that, I narrowed the lead just slightly. It looks like it's 43-34 right now. Still anybody's game as we're only halfway through the season. We're exactly halfway through the season, I guess, at week 6 here. So we'll see what happens here with 6 more weeks to go of the regular season.
Right.
All right.
I'm ready for it.
All right. Well, let's jump right in it. Look at how last week's top 12 tight ends fared. It looks like the leader for the second week in a row was our guy Harold Fannin. He's on a run like I've really never seen a tight end, be on here.
Mm-hmm.
I think 3 games in a, I guess besides the guy right next to him, which is Beck, who finally dipped down and only had 15 points this week. But yeah, Fannin, I had predicted him. I stuck with the guy at the top. He did me right. I got 3 points from him.
Mm-hmm.
Finishing first. Your second best tight end looks like it was Gadsden, who made a nice comeback, had 24.2. And then Stowers against Alabama, you had predicted him to be the worst, but he still managed 17.3. And, the trend we saw emerge 2 weeks ago when he got 17 targets and then 10 targets the following week seems to be, a real, the real deal for him. He's heavily targeted. I think he had 7 or 8 again against Alabama, but Stowers is definitely proving to be the go-to guy there for Vanderbilt.
Yeah, and then don't forget about our third place guy, Koziel. I mean, he did pretty
Right.
well too with his
Oh yeah,
19.2.
exactly.
But yeah, great tight ends on the list. I just kind of went with the matchup. Little did I know, Vanderbilt had other plans and took care of Alabama.
Yeah. One thing I'll point out, and you'll see this when we move to the up-to-date year-to-date list, is 2 tight ends were on a bye, so we had 10 that played, and 8 out of those 10 scored over 12 points. So this was one of those weeks we talk about where just because a guy finishes in the bottom 3, like Tyler Warren actually had 12.4 points and finished as the third worst tight end among the top tight end list here. So, he didn't really fall off much from that number 4 spot. You'll see here when we flip to the next slide. But, the worst was Brenningstool, who happens to be the only guy that didn't make it back to the list. He had 5.2. But your second worst was Louder with 6.3. The new tight end on the list from Boise State. But to finish as third worst and still get 12 points is showing you exactly how good the tight ends did. And it looks like we've really got a stable group now. Finally here among the tight ends. You've got a lot of guys that you can count on week to week. And I will point out, as we're looking at it here, you weren't the only one that missed on that worst pick. Colston Loveland also had 15 points. And I picked him to do the worst. I wasn't really sure how he was going to come back or if he was going to play based on injury, but looks like he's healthy and, he's all set to get double-digit points every week again.
Right. Like I said, I mean, we got 12 guys on the list. They're
Mm-hmm.
the top 12 for a reason. We're just trying to, steer you,
In the right direction.
to what to the right direction of what we think is going to be the worst. But, we'll say this, well, let's say, we have, our tier 1 guys, which is Fannin and Beck.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have your tier 2. So if they're not on those lists, you're kind of grasping. I mean, you're hoping for a double digit. But those guys may not even, like I say, they're not on the list, but we're just steering you to where we feel if you are not have to have this 12.
Right, exactly. All right, let's see how, again, with all these good performances, there wasn't a lot of shakeup. The top 4 actually stayed exactly the same. Fannin number 1, Beck still number 2, Koziel number 3, Warren number 4. And the only thing that happened at 5 and 6 was a flip flop. You had Gadsden pass Keithy, who happened to be on a bye. So because of Gadsden's good performance, he leapfrogged Keithy, took his number 5 spot. Keithy slides down to 6. Then you have, Stowers moved up 2. Loveland stayed right in the 8 spot where he was. Mason Taylor went from 10 to 9. Fleming went from 11 to 10. So both of those guys moved up 1. And then Louder is the only one that really had a big fall. He dropped from 7 to 12 because he only managed 6.3. But he had done so well before that. He's still at 11.9 points. The new guy, Royer, actually made his way up just because he was on a bye. And the 12.0 average that he had, going into the bye. So he just slid in from the number 13 spot, passing Brenningstool, who had the bad game, and Louder, who had the other bad game among the top 12. And Royer's not a name we're not unfamiliar with. He's a guy you've mentioned a few times as being the real deal there at Cincinnati. And now he's finally here on the top 12 list for us to talk about a little bit more.
Right. I'm looking forward to that. Like I said, I have him in our home league as well as the quarterback. they have a pretty decent matchup. Not to give away any picks that we might choose here coming soon, but I do love what Cincinnati's putting together.
Yeah.
It's interested to see how far he goes. And maybe we have a little bit of a competition of who's going to move up, who's going to move down here in the next 2 weeks since this tight end list. I think it's kind of getting pretty locked on where it's
Yeah,
going to
yeah.
be.
I mean, when you get to the point where only one guy has swapped in and out on the list, I think you're starting to see quite a bit of stabilization here. But with
Hmm.
that, we will make our picks from. Let's see, how many are on bye? We've got one bye. Loveland is not playing this week. No, two. Beck is not playing also. So we'll have 10 guys to choose from again. If we pick the guy that gets the best, we get 3 points. If we pick the guy that gets second best, 2 points. Third best, 1 point. And the inverse of that for picking the worst, second worst, or third worst. But I think I went first last. You said whoever loses will go
Yep.
first. So you're
Yep.
first this week.
No. I mean, whoever's leading, which I am.
Yeah. Huh?
So you're still first since
Oh, okay,
you're,
okay. So
behind in
the lead
points.
in it. Okay, well that's
Yes,
great
yes.
because I'm going to go with the guy that I've got in a few leagues. He's also a guy that I played in the waiver watch this week because he's the only top 10 guy that's rostered under 10% at the moment, and that's Dorian Fleming, who has an excellent matchup going against Old Dominion, who is dead last in giving up points against tight ends, according to Fantrax. And, we always like to pair that up with how that pass D is looking overall. And it's the 104th best, or maybe we should say worst, pass D in the country, giving up nearly 250 yards a game. Haven't given up a ton of touchdowns, only 6. But again, the tight ends are, feasting, it seems, on that Old Dominion defense. So I'll go with old Dorian Fleming here. But I think I left a couple on the board for you so that you might not have to pick the same guy as me.
Yeah. And speaking of that, I'm probably going to take Fannin, but in the loss to Old Dominion, he had 42.8 points. So that's an excellent choice for Fleming. Yeah, that's some production.
Well, or we could look at it this way: Fannon's so good that he makes Old Dominion look that much worse against tight ends when they're really not. But they are 103rd against the pass, so I think that's why you always got to check some other stats and don't just rely on Fantrax's rating as well. But that's crazy that Fannin got 42 against them a couple weeks ago.
Right.
Yeah.
So I mean, with that, I can't really just go against the number one guy,
Okay.
until he just has a disaster matchup,
Yep.
which I'm not sure. You know, he had 30.7 against Penn State,
Right.
so I'm gonna have to go Harold Fannin until something else changes. I mean, he is your true bona fide number one in my opinion, as far as like the true tight end. Like we say, we know Beck is kind of like that cheat code, so.
Right.
He is the number one tight end, and so until I see that it changes, I'm going with him if you don't take him.
Yeah, and we'll have to look at Bauer's numbers later, for next week and just see how it compares. But like I said, I don't think I've ever seen a tight end with this kind of a run. Like going back to week 2, he had nearly 31, then he had 28 and a half, then he had 42.8, and then he had 32.2 last week. So,
Mm-hmm.
aside from that first week where he had 12.7, which is still good for any regular tight end, this guy's had nearly 30 points plus, or actually, yeah, he has had 30 points in 3 of the 4, but nearly got there in all 4 of his last games. So that's
Yeah,
incredible. That's quarterback numbers from a tight end.
right. So I'll be watching this one though to see possibly what NIU is bringing to the table against these tight ends to get this 4th rank in Fantrax eyes and
Yeah.
see is it a scheme or is it a couple of linebackers, whatever. But they may be shutting this position down, but they're not shutting down the other offenses.
Yeah,
So
and they
we'll
are.
see.
Northern Illinois is 22nd against the pass, only giving up 169 a game and only
Mm-hmm.
5 touchdowns. But again, we haven't done this yet. But you'd have to look. Maybe teams are just running the ball so well against Northern Illinois, they're not needing to pass. But we know Bowling Green's going to be passing the ball to Fannin regardless. So I agree with you. I don't think people have to worry if they've got Fannin. He's clearly in the category where you play no matter what. Even if you've got Fleming playing Old Dominion, I think you go with Fannin there. Even though I picked Fleming over him, I like the kid. Wanted to make sure he got his notoriety, but I think those are the two big ones this week, along with Koziol, who I actually thought you might take because of the matchup Fannin had. I thought maybe you'd go Koziol against that 127th ranked Kent State, but that'd probably be the other one you keep an eye on.
Well, I mean, I know what they did to Notre Dame,
Mm-hmm.
but you look at their schedule. They had Buffalo, NC State, and UMass.
They're talking about Northern Illinois, yeah.
Talking about Northern Illinois.
Mm-hmm.
These are not barn burner offenses that
Right.
they've come up against. I mean, you mentioned their pass defense. Well, they give up about 100 on the ground, but looking at these other offenses,
Right.
that's not impressing me yet.
Right. I hear you. Whereas Koziol, he's got that good matchup like Fleming. So again, I think if you got Koziol, you feel really good about your matchups this week too. But let's get into who we think might do the worst. And looks like the guys near the bottom have the worst matchups, clearly, between Royer playing UCF, who's 14th against tight ends, and Louder against Hawaii. It's still hard for me to believe Hawaii's got a defense that's really, that good, although it seems like maybe they do. But I think I will go. I want to lean Stowers in a way too because he's playing a tough, Kentucky defense. It's usually pretty tough, but after what he did against Alabama, I don't think I can go against him. So yeah, you know what? I'll go Louder, who's hanging on to that 12th spot. He slipped a little bit last week, only had 6. It says Hawaii can shut tight ends down, in terms of fantasy production. They've only given up 5 TDs in the air. So, yeah, I'll stick with Louder going against Hawaii. I'd say maybe look for some other options if that's who you've got.
Yeah, I was also looking at him. I still might take him. We'll decide here in a second. Hawaii, like you said, it's interesting. They haven't really, to me, they've been on more buys than games, but
Yeah.
they give up 120 on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
I have a feeling that Genty probably will have that by halftime. So they probably won't have to throw.
Mm-hmm.
So I love that pick.
Okay.
I don't think I'm going to double down on it, even though I really kind of want to.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna go Mason Taylor.
Okay.
Just because of the matchup. I know Ole Miss is showing that they're 93rd against tight ends, but this should be a really, really good game.
Mm-hmm.
They may have to lean a little bit more on the wide receivers. So yeah, I'm gonna take a chance here and take Mason Taylor.
Yeah, and either way, it looks like regardless of how those tight ends got, the points against Mississippi, they weren't getting in the end zone most likely because they've only given up 2 touchdowns in the air.
Yeah, and then we talk about tiers also as far as where we're ranking these tight ends. This is kind of like that third tier. Our tight end 3 through 8, I like them a little bit better than these last 4.
Right. I hear you as far as reliability. Okay.
Right.
Well, there you go. Let's then take a look at how we did last week and how last week's top 16 did in terms of the wide receivers. We had, let's see. Let me just get my notes here. Nick Nash,
Okay.
the number 1 guy, held on to his spot, but he had a light week for himself with 23. Your number 1 performer, wasn't through the roof. It was Ted McMillan there with 24.1. It was actually Tez Johnson at 24.4. Ted McMillan had the 24.1 for the second best. And actually, I'm reading it all wrong. I had my notes all confused. Let's start. Yeah, I'll go back to Ja'Cory Brooks. I labeled things wrong here. Ja'Cory Brooks was first with 27.1. I had him picked that's the thing I was talking about in the beginning. I had Brooks picked to have the worst game. thinking that Lacey might take some targets away from him, and was wrong on that one. He's still going to clearly be the number one guy there at Louisville. Got 27-1. Tez Johnson finished second with 24-4, and Ted McMillan was third with 24-1. So I had the right guys, just had them out of order. Then the worst, you nailed it with the worst. Kelly,
What'd you have for Ted's? I'm sorry.
I had him with 24.4.
Okay. Okay.
All right.
All right.
And again, they weren't scores that were through the roof, but they were still above everyone, or right around everyone's average, I guess we would say. But you nailed it with Kelly having the worst performance from the group, 7.7. Then you had Dante Ross, who only had 10.6. We'll talk about that in a sec. And then Trey Harris, who had the third worst with 11.1. So we do have a couple notes there, starting with Harris, who was the third worst with only 11.1 after he had been averaging 31.9. He did get hurt during that game. So that's just one of those things to keep an eye on going into week 7. It doesn't seem real clear, what the status is going to be, but we do know that the SEC is required now to put out a legitimate injury report a couple hours before the game. So you should be able to get a real update on Trey Harris at least. Dante Ross, I texted you during that game because they played, I think, in the Thursday game, and we had wondered maybe what was going wrong in the week before. His numbers had started going down, and it looks like Troy is on QB3 right now, the guy that started the season for him. Another quarterback had played a couple of games, and from everything I could tell, looking at the stats, they're down to QB3 at Troy, which is hurting Ross's production right now.
No, absolutely, it is. I mean, the guy has 10 targets
Mm-hmm.
and he was 2 for 26 in a score, but you get it in the area.
Yeah.
I'll say that.
Yep. That's crazy that he had 10 targets. So he's still getting his targets. They still know it's the guy they want to get the ball. They just can't get it to him, and it was pretty ugly watching that quarterback try to operate last week.
Yeah.
But definitely saw why Ross is starting to suffer a little bit. You'll see, when we move to the next slide where he fell. And Josh Kelly, I think that's just the risk you run, when you have a Texas Tech receiver is you kind of don't know who it's going to be on a consistent basis. That's the way they've been for the last couple of years. So not a huge surprise there. I'm sure he'll bounce back. But for right now, he's going to bounce off the list. And if you want to move it up, Willie, we'll take a look at how things shook out overall.
Which I'm happy to see because that's where I got some decent points there.
Yeah.
With Kelly.
Right. Yeah. You got your 3 points for picking him to be the worst for sure. Still, this was surprisingly the position with the most movement in the year-to-date list, and it was only 3 players that moved off the list and 3 players that moved out. The 3 that made an exit were Dante Wright from Temple. Even though he had 14.7 points, it wasn't enough to keep him on the list. Kelly, who we mentioned, only had 7.7. And then Williams, who was at number 16, Kyle Williams from Washington State, he had a bye, but enough guys that were behind him had big enough games to pass him up. And those guys in particular were the guys sitting here now at number 15 and 16, which is Jalen Royals, who had 42.1 for Utah State, and Ricky White, who had 29.5. And Ricky White, from everything we've seen, is much better off now with Haj Malik Williams as the QB there at UNLV. Seems to be a much better passer than Sluka was, where Sluka might tuck it and run a little bit more. Williams is looking for White. It's paying off. The other thing we've seen, we can't put it all on having a better quarterback. Ricky White has scored 2 blocked field goal or blocked punt TDs in the past 2 weeks, which is pretty amazing. They've got Ricky White on the punt team, not necessarily as a returner, but a guy who's, they're trying to block the punt. And it's worked. He scored 2 touchdowns on blocked punts in the last 2 weeks. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, we may have to add that into or unless it's already being added.
Yeah.
We have to put that into the equation on our scoring at some point. But
yeah,
man, that's impressive.
Yeah, surprisingly, we've got to look at our kind of our mock league and see if we are accounting for that. I know it seems to be kind of a 50-50 split among leagues that I'm in on whether or not those special teams TDs are counting for receivers or other
Mm-hmm.
guys when they return TDs. But yeah, a little bit surprised when I started getting into more leagues how many don't allow points for return TDs, even if it's a wide receiver or running back getting those.
Yeah, that's pretty sad though. I mean, especially if you don't have IDPs, you don't do defenses, and especially if you don't do kickers. Let these guys, wherever they score, let them get their 6 points.
Right, right. But overall, I would say, the fact that you saw three guys exit the list is more proof that this was maybe the weakest performing position group this week. You only had four guys out of the top 16 that were over 20 points by my notes. We mentioned the top three, but then you had Jeremiah Smith from Ohio State. Was one of the only other ones. Well, I guess along with Feli Ashlock, who had 21 as well. But just compared to what we saw with the running backs, which we'll see here in a minute, and even the tight ends and quarterbacks, a down week for the top performers. Uh, Nash is still at the top. Felton had a bye. He's right there with him. Same for Travis Hunter. A lot of these guys are very close to the same spots they were at. Dante Ross fell from 6 to 10 with his weaker performance. Ja'Cory Brooks made a slight jump from 15 to 11. Jamal Pritchett is your third name that's new on the list, and he happens to have a bye this week, but he had a big one for Southern Alabama with 32-7, which puts him in at the number 13 spot, because he was already sitting at 19. But Jalen Royals jumping from 54th up to 15th. That's pretty amazing there for him. And we know his name from big performances last year. He'd just been a little bit more quiet this year. So it's good to see him return to the list. And yeah, this was his second game in a row with over 27. So he followed 27 from 2 weeks ago with the 42. Prior to that, he had 8.4 and 11. So he's seems to have returned to 2023 form at Utah State. I think a big part of that is Petrus is back and healthy, the Utah State quarterback that was out to start the season. So I think Royals is a guy that you might see here now more routinely for the second half of the season.
I definitely agree with that. I have quite a few stock and Royals.
And
So
Royals. All right. Well, now
yeah,
it should start to pay off.
yeah, very happy.
Yep. All right. Well, I went first on the tight ends. We'll give you the shot here to go first with the wide receivers for your best or
Yeah,
worst.
no doubt where I'm going here. I'm going with the number one guy.
Okay.
He's a must start, must play anytime.
Okay.
He had 23 last week, which is still better than the 16th person, Ricky White, that's on the list.
Mm-hmm.
Give me Nick Nash every day of the week, probably no matter what the matchup is. So,
All right. Sounds good. And there's a guy that really just jumped off the page to me sitting here, and that's Pafeli Ashlock from Hawaii. I wanted to bring up his target number. He's had 71 targets in 5 games, including 17 last week, and then 13 in the 2 weeks before, and 19 against UCLA 4 weeks ago. The only week he didn't have double-digit targets was week 1 against Delaware State, and they won that one pretty handily. So this is a guy that looks like he's going to get at least 12 to 15 targets a game. The efficiency isn't wonderful. He's getting usually 8, 9, or 10 catches out of that, but that's enough to get him 80 or 90 yards every game and usually a touchdown. So expect them to be playing from behind and passing the ball as they've been doing. So I'll go with Ashlock as a strong pick here, I think, for the best for the week.
yeah, because I'd like to say that, the Genty effect
Mm-hmm.
might come into play. But, he may score so fast on them that, Hawaii will be on the field quite a
Yeah,
bit. So,
exactly.
yeah, I cannot knock what you did there.
Okay.
So I'm going to go. Let's see. I had the guy here, and I think I changed my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go Tez Johnson. I'm still not quite sure what's going on. They're getting a little better, but I expected Gabriel to be, on this list. He's not.
Right. Yeah, we expected
So
Bo Nix 30 points a game numbers for sure.
right, yeah. And so I'm not sure just what's quite going on with that, but I don't like it. So
Okay.
since they have Ohio State this week, that's my pick.
Right. And since you mentioned it, yeah, Gabriel, he's had over 20 every game, 20.9 in week one. The last 2 weeks, he's had basically 26 and 25. And that's kind of where he's hovering, is kind of that 25-point range. So not horrible, but again, not eye-popping like Bo Nix was these last couple of years at Oregon, and not even as good as he was the last couple of years at Oklahoma. Normally he was closer to 30 as well. So, yeah, I agree. From what I could tell, they're just not having to throw the ball as much.
Right, and this is the toughest defense that they faced all year. I mean, Idaho, Boise, Oregon State, UCLA.
Yep.
So
Yep.
it might be a little tougher this week.
Right. Well, I'm going to go with the guy on the other end of that matchup. Um, Ohio State's only given up 2 touchdowns passing, but their opponent, Oregon, has also only given up 2 touchdowns passing. Both of them are giving up not that many yards. Oregon's given up 160. Ohio State's only given up 130. So I think the true freshman struggles. Hopefully, that same comment that I made when Alabama played Georgia won't come to haunt me this week, when I thought Williams wouldn't be able to do it against Georgia. But this is a legitimately tough passing defense here at Oregon. Plus I think the running game there at Ohio State, if it's working, they don't have to force the throw. So I think it'll just be tough to get the yards there for Smith. The way they spread it out a little bit, similar to how they do at Oregon. They've got a lot of weapons to choose from. So I'd shy away from him a little bit this week if I had him. I mean, I think picks like the 2 we made are better. Ja'Cory Brooks going against Virginia, Denzel Boston at Iowa. Those are teams that are both ranked over 100 in terms of their scoring versus the position and fantasy numbers. I will say Felton, keep an eye on at number 2. He's playing Northwestern, which sounds great. But he and Prater both got a little bit banged up in the last game, and along with another receiver. And the only thing their coach has said so far is 2 of the 3 receivers will play, but he didn't say which 2 out of the 3. They do have to make that a formal announcement, kind of like the SEC. The Big Ten is requiring legitimate injury reports, so keep an eye on Felton prior to game time. And look,
Well,
Travis Hunter is also should be a great pick there against Kansas
hmm
State. So
hmm
you should see a much better performance by the receivers as a group overall this week. I think a lot of big receiver performances coming.
yeah, the number 2 on my list that I was going to stay away from was going to be Ted McMillan.
Yeah,
Because he kind of has a dart situation going on where he's
right,
up and down, up and down. So he had 24 and a half. So to
right,
me, it's a downswing. They get BYU. The thing I
yep,
like about Jeremiah Smith is his height,
right,
his build. So we'll see if those Oregon DBs can
mhm,
handle 6'3". So
right, right,
Tet's one. It's also one to think about. If you have another option on the list, you might go there.
right. Which sounds interesting because he's number 5 overall. But like you said, when a guy's been inconsistent, it can be a little bit frustrating. You're saying you're not ready to put him in the play no matter what category, basically.
Right. Like I said, until we get a little bit more consistency, I'm going to say that because, okay, so in New Mexico, 64 and a half. Then, of course, Northern Arizona he had 3.1.
Mm-hmm.
Then 24.8 drops back down to 11 against
Right.
Utah. And then
Yep.
he had 24.1 last week. So we get
Yep.
another decent defense.
Mm-hmm.
Will he go back down again?
Right. Right. And BYU is pretty solid against the pass. They're 24th against the pass. They've only given up 3 touchdowns, so I think you're making sense there. Might be a little heads up for the Tet McMillan owners. So,
Yeah.
all right, let's look at the running backs. I talked about the receivers kind of not faring as well. I think this is one of the reasons. You had 8 out of 15 running backs score over 20 points. They were led by Desmond Reed, who had a nice bounce back from a bye week and an injury, and followed by a bye week. Came back and got 38 points. The second best was our guy Ashton Jeanty, who had 36.6, who you and I both picked to be the best. Could we say he disappointed us because he was only second best? I wouldn't do that. He's still
No.
averaging 42.6, but he did only get 36.6 this week, shockingly. And then the third best was number 7, Cameron Scatabo, with 28.5. Got notable performances. Dylan Sampson continues to be very steady. He had 27.9. Darius Taylor had a solid 25. And then the Navy running back, Heidenreich, had a 25.1 as well. So a lot of really big games by a lot of really good running backs this week. The negative side, you had Brashard Smith, who I predicted to be the worst, actually was with 9.9. But here's where we're talking about the running backs overall doing very well. The second worst performance was Henry Parrish, and he still had 14.1. Or actually, he was the third worst because then Monangai had the second worst with 11.6. But when you're getting down to the third worst, and he still got 14 points. Really, the only disappointing games were Monangai with his 11. You predicted that, and then I predicted the worst with Brashard Smith. So we completely steered you right this week with the running back picks. So props to us, Willie.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, you don't expect, I know Desmond is a dual threat, but you don't expect him to have 11 catches for 155. So
So
that's how you knock Genty off of his post for a week. You
right,
just don't
right,
expect it, and especially when he only had 55 on the ground,
right,
so.
exactly. Yep. I guess the last guy, the one I missed here that had a really solid game again was Hankerson, the lead running back there at Oregon State. He had 26.9. Let's roll it up and see who's got who ended up moving the most here on the new list. And
Right.
surprise, surprise, Ginty's performance was not bad enough to knock him down since he was the second best. All it did was it took him down 42.6, and he's still averaging over 40 a game. Ginty's still there with 41.4. Reed does move up thanks to his big game to number 4 because R.J. Harvey only had 18. Still a good game by Harvey, but he slipped down to the number 3 spot. Caleb Johnson, similar, only had 17.1, which again I think most of us will be okay with. He slipped one to 4. And then Dylan Sampson held tight at the 5 spot. He's still averaging 29.4. And then Scatabo moved up 1. Anderson moved up 3 spots from 10 to 7. The big newcomer here is LeQuint Allen, who, again, fantasy players are all familiar with him from some big seasons, big season last year, the last couple of years. But he made a nice jump from 27 to 8 thanks to a 45.9 point game. And that was, I think, on a Friday night, so a lot of people probably got to see that when they were against UNLV in a little bit of a shootout. The other two new names, or other, there's only two new names. It's Allen and Taj Brooks, who jumps from 20 to 12 as he continues to play a dual role there, running the ball quite a bit, but still also getting some decent amount of receptions to push him into the top 16. The guys that didn't manage to stick around were Monangai. I would guess he'll make a couple more appearances here before the season's over, even though he's got a tough game against Wisconsin this week. And then Parrish fell off from Ole Miss. And then the other new name there, like I said, was Taj Brooks, along with LeQuint Allen, who are joining us this week to choose from. 3, this is interesting, Willie. I don't know if you saw this. The bottom 5 guys all have buys. So we should,
Right.
theoretically, we should have easy going here at running back since we're only having to pick the best and the worst from 11 guys, believe it or not. But since the bottom 5 are all on buy.
Right. And that also means to me is that there's going to be, two of these guys are going to drop off. That's what I'm going to say.
You're going to say
There's going to be some matchups here that are going to push two of these five off the list,
The five
probably
that are
three.
sitting there with buys, five with buys are
Yes,
going to be
yes,
passed up, like
yep,
similar to the
yep,
receivers that we saw last week. Okay. Um,
yes.
all right. Well, I've got to go first, right? So
Yeah, you
I
can go ahead
think
and take him.
no, I'm going to wait. I want to think. I want to think about that. See what I want to do there. Uh, I think the glaring one for me, the one even more glaring than taking GT as the best, is I'm going to take Scatabo as the worst going against that Utah defense, which always seems to be tough against the run. Um, they're fourth on Fantrax. They've only given up one rushing touchdown this year and 107 yards a game. So as tough as Scatabo is, out of the 11 we're choosing from, he's going to be my pick to have the worst game.
All right. Well, I'm going to do that. I'm going to take a guy who, you know, he's just he's just hovering on the list, and so now he should solidify himself as staying on the list
Mm-hmm.
for the remainder of the season. And now I'm going to take Anthony Hankerson against Nevada
Oh, it's the best. Nice.
as the best.
Okay, good. Yeah, I'll always remember that I thought he was going to be the guy there when the season. We talked about the week one list, and then I thought, I got it wrong. But he's been back here every week since after week two. So he's been very consistent. I'm going to also go against the grain. People probably don't want to see us pick GT every week, so we'll make up for both of us picking him last week. I'll go Mario Anderson from Memphis, who's doing what a lot of people thought he would now there at Memphis. He is, the number 7 guy. He's playing South Florida, but he's number 7 overall, averaging nearly 25 points a game. And I love the fact that South Florida has given up 12 rushing touchdowns. Um, yeah, I say he's doing what we thought he would do. He's getting a lot of catches now. Finally, he started the season with 1 catch, then he had 4 catches in back-to-back games, then he had 5, then he had 6 last week on 6 targets. So he's a guy who's being targeted 5 to 7 times a game, on top of the 17 or 18 carries he's going to get, and he's gone over 100 yards 3 times with those carries. So he's finding the end zone. He's getting the catches. He's getting over 100 yards. It's going to be tough to go wrong with Mario Anderson, especially against South Florida, who's given up a ton of touchdowns on the ground with 12, which is, I'm looking now, could be the most. It's quite a few. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah,
I'm trying to
yeah.
sort by touchdowns. It is in the bottom third of teams right now. So great matchup there
Oof.
for Anderson.
Okay. So for my worst, we're going to give a couple of different examples. That way we don't have the same for sure. I know it's
Okay.
competition, but still, just based on the defense itself, I'm going to go. I know he's just been a workhorse of a back.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about carries 25, 19, 29, and 23.
Mm-hmm.
But it just depends on what he does with it. Georgia Tech's defense is pretty stout against the run.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm gonna stay away from Amari and Hampton this week. They've only given up 2 rushing touchdowns on the season. They give 87 and a half rush yards a game.
Okay.
If they're going to have to stay truly dedicated to him, if they want to have this success, which based on what they've given up, I think they probably abandon that a little bit and have to pass a little more.
Yeah, and it seems like the way North Carolina's playing and the passing game that they have, if you just focus on shutting Hampton down, you're probably going to win the game against them right now. So,
Mm-hmm.
uh, you would think that it's going to be they'll be on a mission to just shut him down because he's the only thing that seems to be working consistently. So, can't knock your logic there.
Or they'll just go throw it to the 2 tight ends and then take their chances.
Right. I hear you. Yeah, with only 11 guys, he's near the bottom end of the 11 we're choosing from. So again,
Mm-hmm.
you can't go wrong from that perspective either. He's got the second highest average among the other guys that we're choosing from. So if you just look at
Right.
it that way, the chances are you'll be right.
Yeah, there you go.
All right. Okay. All right. We'll finish up with quarterbacks as usual. We've been kind of sticking to the same order this year, which makes sense to me.
Well, yeah, it just so I've been doing it based on the averages. So, who is ever in that 16th place or that last spot,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that's, whoever scores the most points, that's how we're kind of how we're gauging that. So we have a little bit of method to the madness, but yeah, so quarterbacks are still, the Nussmeier's getting 27 and a half. That's quite a few points. So we'll stick with the quarterback position going last.
And yeah. I think it makes sense to wrap it up with the quarterbacks, anyways. Always a lot to talk about, and always interesting. This week, we just looking at the overall numbers: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Sorry to count it out loud here. 9 quarterbacks had over 23 points. You could throw Barnett in there from JMU as a 10th who got over 20. So that shows you how good the quarterbacks did. 10 out of the 13 eligible, no, 12, 10 out of the 12 eligible scored over 20 points. Um, and to put that in other perspective, Barnett from JMU, who had his worst game in the last 3 outings, still managed nearly 21 points and was the third worst performer from the list. So I think this is another one where we mentioned last week that the quarterbacks might have a field day, and they came out and did that with nearly all of them getting over 20 points. The only 2 that didn't were Dart, who had his down game with 15.8, and then you had Hoover, who only managed 15.9 for TCU. Otherwise, these guys were all on fire, led by Holstein from Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh just had a great day all around. He had 40.8. The second best performance was your Army QB, Bryson Daly, with 36.6. And the third best performance was McLeod from Texas State, who had 35.3. Now that he's found 3 different receivers that he can go to that are all doing well, with Jaden Williams, Cole Wilson, and Hobart. He's now got a third option. So he's able to just chunk the ball all over the field there. But yeah, any thoughts on just like the outstanding performance here by the quarterbacks? You think we'll wait and see if you think they can repeat it when we get to the next slide. But yeah,
Yeah, no, I apologize to the Jordan McLeod faithful. I thought Troy would do a lot better, but yeah, I'm not gonna forget you just yet, Jordan. We'll revisit you here in the coming weeks, that's for sure.
yeah,
But we talked about Louisiana Monroe's defense. They're still they're proving something. That sixth rank that they had last week means something,
yeah. We joked around
obviously.
about it. They were ranked 6th on Fantrax when we looked it up. That kind of checked out with their overall passing offense, and for that reason, we didn't pick Barnett as one of our favorites. We didn't know what they do. They limited him to 20, and it's a guy that had 60 and 50 points in the last couple of weeks. So
Right.
yeah, and they're still sitting at 43rd in passing with only 3 touchdowns allowed after playing against Barnett. So
Right.
yeah, hats off to that Louisiana Monroe defense, who seems to have taken Troy's spot as the defense you don't want to play against in the Sun Belt. So we'll see if they can keep that up. All right. We talked about how there were a lot of great performances, so you don't expect a lot of shakeup here. Let's see how the new year-to-date top 16 looks like, how it looks for the quarterbacks. And you had just a slight mix-up in the top 3. Milroe dropped to number 3, even though he had 23.4 points. Tier moved into that number 1 spot. Even sitting there with a bye, he was able to move into number 1 from his number 2 spot because of Milroe's slightly down performance. But then Horvath also passed Milroe because Horvath from Navy, the other Service Academy QB, in the top 7, 28.9. I picked him to be my worst, but Air Force defense apparently just isn't what they used to be. So Horvath and Daly, both from the Service Academies, in the top 7. Willie, what do you think about that?
Well, we've talked about it. I expect them to stay here.
Okay.
I really do.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, they're just not afraid to pass anymore.
Right.
So
And what's crazy is they're not passing a ton, but like you got both of these guys when they do, they're completing the ball and they're completing them for long passes. You got like stat lines of 18 rushes for 120 yards and 5 for 5 and 100 and, passing with a touchdown. It's
right.
pretty crazy.
Yep. No,
So
I like I said, I expect them to be here.
yeah, and the otherwise nobody's moved more than 2 or 3 spots outside of maybe Jackson Dart slipping from 8 to 13. But he's still around. Nussmeyer moves up from 16 to 15 because Hoover is gone. Which made room for Jacksonville State quarterback Tyler Huff, who is playing on Thursday night. We're trying to get this recorded and posted, for tonight, so that if he is one of our choices, you guys will know about it. If not, you'll be hearing this after Huff, so we'll see what happened there. But it seems like Rich Rodriguez has got the entire Jacksonville State offense rolling. We had 2 guys, including Huff, and their running back picked in the waiver watch this week. So they've definitely got a lot of options at Jacksonville State. But let's see what the final picks are here, Willie. You're going to kick off the quarterback picks with your best or your worst.
Okay. So I was going to go Barnett,
Mm-hmm.
but
For best?
oh yeah, for best. But
Yep.
I changed my mind because Coastal Carolina they give up 199 pass yards a game. But
Uh-huh.
then I'll go and I look at Klubnik. Wake Forest is giving up 100 yards more, so they're giving up about 291 in the air. So I want to go Cade Klubnik against Wake Forest.
Okay. That's probably who I was going to take, but unless it's a really obvious one, we like to keep it spread around. So you're going to go Klubnik. I totally second that thought. Yeah, I could see the circle there. I'm not sure why it's
Yeah,
behind, but as far as my pick, I think let me check something. Coastal. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and go with the guy you didn't take. I think they bounce back. Coastal's a good matchup. They've given up 9 TDs in the air. They're giving up nearly 200 yards a game. He can also run, so you don't just need to
hmm
rely on the pass game from Barnett. He's proven to be the newest top dual threat that's out there. My choice after you took Klubnik was going to be Barnett or Bryson Daly going against UAB. And I'm just leaning slightly towards Barnett there, but Daly would have been the next guy on my list to take.
gotcha.
Yeah.
And then too many good matchups like we said before. So I'm gonna go with the LSU again. Stand away from them this week, and I'm gonna take Nussmeier as my one to avoid since they have Mississippi, even though it's at home.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a good choice. You're that matches up with your Mason Taylor pick, by the way. So you're
Yeah. I mean,
consistently going against them. Yeah.
yeah, Mississippi they've given up 2 touchdown passes. They
Mm-hmm.
have 5 interceptions as a team.
Yeah.
So at least looking out all these other matchups, they're just a little bit too juicy to
Yeah.
and Milrow. Hey, if you guys if they're not fired up this week against South Carolina, I'm not sure they will be
Right.
going forward.
Right. I hear you, and I think I'm just checking something. Considering going Jackson Dart against LSU, which would be our second picks, where we kind of we picked the worst in the same matchup. Because a lot of these other guys, I expect, to do fairly well. Dampier's playing that Air Force defense that just gave up a ton of points to the Navy QB. Huff, we talked about him. He's playing tonight. The day we're recording this on Thursday. That's a really good matchup, it looks like, against New Mexico State that we might have overlooked down there at the bottom also. And I just really can't go Milrow against South Carolina, even though that looks like the toughest matchup. So, yeah, I think let's look for Dart maybe to have, a weaker game. I won't say a horrible game, but a weaker game compared to some of the guys on the list. I don't expect him to get in the high 20s. Let's predict more of a 19, 20, 21 point type game for Jackson Dart.
Yeah, I'm hoping not only because I haven't been in our home league, so
Yeah.
need that production, but I could see where you're going there. And so what were you saying about you like New Mexico State's defense or you don't?
No, I'm saying as far as one of the best picks, maybe we overlooked Tyler Huff down there playing against New Mexico State.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing is that, they haven't been bad. They've given up 4 passing touchdowns, have 3 interceptions. They give up 229.
Yeah, that is one of those that is a little deceiving on the Fantrax number versus they're a little better. They're 87th, which is more middle of the pack than bottom of the pack, like it would indicate here from Fantrax. So a
Mm-hmm.
little bit of mixed signals there on the Huff matchup.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a little that one's interesting. One that I thought you might take
Hmm.
would have been Kyle McCord. So they,
Yeah,
North Carolina State, they've given up 11.
yeah. Oh,
So
for you're talking about for best pick.
yeah.
The tough one this week. I think the much tougher route is picking the worst. Because there's
Yeah.
I think the ones that look like tough matchups, the quarterbacks have just been too good to doubt. Like when I say
Right.
that, I mean I don't want to doubt Milrow against just because he's
hmm
playing South Carolina. They're
And we saw
ranked
what
high.
Holstein did last week.
Yeah, Holstein against Cal, they're ranked high, but I think both of those quarterbacks are too good to
hmm
scared by that. And there's not
And
really that many other. There's all the other matchups are very favorable for the quarterback. So again,
right.
this should be another big week for the QBs on this list for sure.
Right. So I mean, if you have any one year, I'd say don't be afraid to start them.
Yep, stick with them.
And unless you like I say, unless you have another option. Let's see who's right after Huff. So right after him is going to be Sorsby,
Hmm.
and then surprisingly, you got Tucker Gleason from Toledo. Is just he's on his way.
Yeah. Let's see, and maybe that's something we'll add for next week if the lists are so consistent and we don't have a lot of those new names. Maybe we'll look in
Yeah,
position at the
yeah,
guys just
yeah, because
outside the top 16 that we
right.
think might have the best chance of making it into the top 16. That'll be
Yeah, because
another
we
twist.
have we have Sorsby with 26.4,
Yep.
Gleason with 26.3, and then you have Shadur Sanders with 25.9. So
Yeah.
those are your next 3 guys that are looking to make their way onto the list or back onto the list.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, Gleason's only rostered on 38%. So if you're in small leagues, it's a guy to go potentially grab. That he was above the margin that we can talk about for waiver watch officially,
Mm-hmm.
but down the line, especially those last 5 games, he's got some really good matchups there in the MAC. So he should definitely work his way onto this top 16 by the time it's over. Good find,
Right.
and let's do that next week. Maybe we'll look at choose from the 10 guys or the guys in the top 25 that we think might make it in the top 16 next week.
Okay. Yeah,
All right.
sounds good.
All right. Well, that's it for me, Willie. Why don't
Yeah.
you sign us out here?
All right. Thank you guys for watching and listening, and good luck this week.